There is a company from the Netherlands that almost no one knows about, and it's over 400 years old. At its peak, it was worth more than Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Saudi Aramco combined. Yes, you heard that right. And do you know the most interesting part? Most people have never even heard of this company. When we think about power and wealth, we usually think of the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, maybe Wall Street. But long before them, there was something much bigger. This wasn't just a company, it was something the world had never seen before. The first corporation, the first stock exchange, the first IPO, all created by a single entity, the Dutch East India Company. But to understand this, we need to go back to 1580. Spain takes over Portugal, and suddenly, two global powers become one. Together, they dominate trade across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. From the outsides, they looked unstoppable, just like the Titanic, especially for the Dutch, because at that time the Dutch were still fighting for their independence from Spain. So now they weren't just fighting an empire, they were fighting the empire of empires. And they knew one thing: they couldn't win with weapons alone. So they created a new kind of weapon: money. In 1602, several Dutch trading companies merged. The Dutch East India Company was born. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary company, but it wasn't. It had armies, warships, fortresses across the world. This wasn't a company. This was a corporate empire. But here's the point where everything changed. For the first time in history, ordinary people could invest. Not just kings or nobles, regular people too. And they could profit from global expansion. This changed everything, because now, power was no longer tied to land. It was tied to capital. And quietly watching all of this unfold was a family, the House of Orange. They didn't have vast lands, they didn't have massive armies, but they understood something before everyone else. The future wasn't in crowns, it was in capital. So instead of resisting this new system, they embraced it, they funded it, they tied their future to it, and over time, they became part of it. Now think about this: a company that can start wars, sign treaties, control territories. At that point, is it still just a company? At its peak, this company was worth around $7.9 trillion in today's money. That's bigger than most countries. More than 1 million people left the Netherlands to work for this company. They weren't explorers. They were employees, working for a global machine. And behind all of this was a revolutionary idea: the stock market, shares, investment, speculation. This is exactly where modern capitalism was born. But there's one truth about power: when it grows too fast, it begins to crack. By the late 1700s, the cracks started to show. Corruption increased. Costs spiraled out of control. Competition grew, and slowly, the empire began to collapse. In 1795, the company was taken over by the state, and just like that, the most powerful company in history disappeared. But its ideas didn't die, they evolved. Today, we still use the same system: stock markets, public companies, limited liability, global finance. And what about the Netherlands? It's no longer a naval empire, but it's still a financial power. And the House of Orange? They're still there, quietly connected to global industries. But there's also a dark side to this story: massacres, forced labor, exploitation, entire societies wiped out. Because this empire wasn't built only on innovation, it was built on control. And that brings us to one question: if power today belongs to the markets, who controls the markets? Because the crown didn't disappear. It just became invisible.